everyone. A big welcome back to the Nick Elston Show, Season 6, Episode 3, and an amazing guest to continue our season, hot on the heels of last week's episode with Captain Dougie Ward of His Majesty's Royal Navy, with a really, really big, passionate subject, a really big response about that. And today we're going to be delving into not just the personal story of my guest, and she's an amazing person in her own right, but also talking about things like money, which right now at the moment is a real hot topic, a sensitive topic, and very often when combined with things like mental health, it's a taboo within a taboo within a taboo. So without any further ado, please let me introduce you to Ruth Stuckey. Big round of applause for Ruth.
Oh, Nick, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. Great. It's great to see
As
you.
you can tell, big fan.
Back at you.
Ever since our paths crossed at the Initiative for Financial Wellbeing, that was it. You kind of stayed around my world then, which is a really cool thing because I like having quality, decent people around me, and then you're certainly one of those. So for everybody else, tell people who you are, what you do, and where you're from.
Thank you, Nick. Well, I'm Ruth Stuckey, as you said. I am a financial planner? I used to be a financial planner.
Okay.
I no longer actually speak directly with clients, but I'm still very much around the financial planning and financial well-being world. So I had a business called the Red House, which we merged into a larger practice about 5 years ago. I remain as part of that larger practice as a non-exec director, which is great. It's really exciting to be part of a growing firm. And I'm also the chair of the Institute for Financial Wellbeing, which I'm sure we'll come back and have a chat about. And I also these days do some coaching to financial planning business owners and other people really within the financial planning world. So kind of quite a rich and varied, I won't even call it workload, Nick, because it wouldn't be fair to call it work. I'm in that super lucky position where I'm able to do the enjoyable bits of a job that I've done for many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get that completely. And it's and as you quite rightly said, it's now the Institute for Financial Wellbeing. As in when it was first launched, it was the Initiative for Financial Wellbeing. So but either way, some great people getting together do some great things as well. And I think you're right, actually. I think especially for what you do for people, very often it's hard to see things as work when you're seeing the value it brings people on a human level. It doesn't feel like work then, does it?
No. And I think it's one of those things that I struggled with earlier in my career when, people say things like, you should work in your unique ability, do what only you can do. I think, well, that's all very well, but there's a ton of other stuff that needs doing. If I don't do it, it ain't going to get done. And as what was a small business owner, there was 6 or 7 of us at our largest. Yeah, that's still a small business, so you wear many hats, as I'm sure you do in your business, Nick.
Literally,
but now, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now I get to choose the things that I want to do. And I do feel very lucky to be in a position to be able to do that, because I know it's not everybody's truth around their working life. But it's a great place to get to. And as you say, I speak with such interesting people, whether that's people from within the financial planning profession or financial wellbeing profession, or it's talking directly to clients or consumers. It's a really nice place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely want to come back to that, and especially that kind of transition from financial planner to financial coach and all the great work you're doing in terms of speaking and hosting, emceeing, and the non-exec roles and stuff. I love to hear about that transition, because it does feel like societally we have, and even in terms of an industry, there's a shift, isn't there, away from what has traditionally been seen as financial planning into this kind of new way of doing things. It seems to be, from an outsider looking in, it seems to be becoming a lot more human focused as opposed to client focused. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, I started in financial services, dare I say, in about 1990. And it was in the days when people were flogged products. There's no two other ways about it. You had very basic training. People earned commission, excuse me, which sometimes led to suboptimal outcomes. I'm not saying it always was the case, but it was a sales job. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually think sales is a noble profession, as long as you're selling the right thing to the right people at the right price and they're really aware about what they're buying. And I've seen this, I talk about it as an evolution. So back in the day, so probably back in about the late 70s, 80s. So we're a very young industry / professions. It only really got going in the 70s and 80s. And in those days, it was about selling products. And if you're lucky, the client, the consumer got some advice. And I like to call that, version one. And then at the turn of the century, so kind of in the early noughties, certainly from my experience, I started to discover different tools. There were different qualification levels. People started to actually view this more as a profession rather than just a job selling products. And so if you went to see a financial advisor, you were finding that you were talking to people that had got a much greater depth and breadth of knowledge and were much more able to talk holistically about your financial circumstances. And we also started to get different tools such as cash flow planning, which basically enables us to look at all the assets or liabilities that somebody's got, so what they own, what they owe, and we can factor in what we expect their earnings may be over time and start to get a better picture of what their financial future was going to look like. We also started to get, at that time, better priced financial products and investments. And people became, commission was taken off the table and financial advisors would have to charge fees. So quite a movement from where I started. And I call that version 2, of which is financial planning. But that's turning again now, and I'm seeing this version 3 emerging. And to be fair, I see it probably in small pockets rather than across the profession or industry, but where advisors and planners are really starting to get that what is the point of money unless we're using it to help people lead a better life? So it's got very little to do with the underlying products or investments, whether it's a pension or an ISA or a savings account, a life insurance, whatever that may happen to be. If that isn't actually helping that individual, you, Nick, actually be able to live the best life that you can relative to all of your circumstances, what's the bloody point? And the more I think about this, I almost see it as a challenge I like to lay down to my colleagues in the financial planning world, that if we're not actually using our skills and our expertise and our knowledge to help improve our clients' life, not just give them more money, because that's another kind of this whole pursuit of more, which we get thrust upon us. Does that actually make people happier? I don't think it does. I'm also not naive enough to recognise that people are struggling with money right now, and of course there is a level of income that we all need to be able to make sure that we can feel relaxed and comfortable at night. So it's a massive subject, but going back to your point, Nick, about seeing that this is getting much more human-centric, hallelujah, yes it is at last, and of course it should be.
Absolutely. I mean, we will circle absolutely back around to financial well-being, which probably is a day-long recording in itself, because it's such and subjective subject. It has to be said, it means different things to different people. So we will come back to that. But first of all, I want to know more about you, actually. Tell me about kind of baby Ruth. Tell me about kind of growing up, kind of where that was, how education was for you, family life for you, and what's brought you to our virtual door today.
So, I was going to say how long you've got, but anybody could say that, couldn't they? So I was born in Birmingham, so I'm a Brummie, actually, and I love slipping into a Brummie accent, Nick. But my mum and dad moved me and my brother and then to North Devon when I was 6 or 7.
Okay.
And we moved in the first instance to an amazing little fishing village in North Devon called Clovelly, which is a massive tourist attraction.
That's
Yeah,
the cobbled hill, isn't it, with the donkeys and stuff?
exactly. So, so for a kid, it was just like the most wonderful move. And as a kid, you're not really conscious of why you've moved. You've just moved, and you wake up one day and you hear seagulls, and that's quite different. What my mom will say these days, because Clovelly's on the North Devon coast, and the way it's positioned, it means that from October to March, you get no sun because it's kind of deep down in a valley. You don't notice things like that so much as a kid, do you?
Oh,
So we lived there, and that I remember that being a fun time. And then we moved from there. My dad had always got this passion to buy wrecks of properties and do them up. So we moved to mid Devon, and my dad bought, without my mum seeing it, I guess that was a 70s kind of thing, a wreck of what was an old pub called the Old George Inn, which was a beautiful thatch cob cottage, but massively in need of redecoration. Well, pulling to pieces, which my dad started to do. And then one Friday night, he went to the pub for drinks with his mates and phoned my mom to say, I'm not coming home. And so that was it. He left, which was a bit of a shock for my mom, as you might imagine. And I think, again, as a kid, so I'd have been 7, 8-ish then, you don't quite know how to process that, do you, really? And I don't think my mom quite knew how to process it. So it kind of started off, well, Dad's gone away for a couple of weeks, and then their split became permanent. But and we did stay in touch with my dad. It wasn't like he totally disappeared from my life, but it was a change. So my mom, understandably, was all over the place. My mom and dad had been very, very young parents, so my mom was still very young. And we moved back to Birmingham, my brother and I, for a year or so, and lived with my grandma. And then my mom actually realised Birmingham wasn't the place for her, so we moved back to North Devon, and my upbringing continued in North Devon. I was pretty sporty. I was of reasonable intelligence, went to the local comp, and played netball, hockey, did all right in my exams. Kind of got caught up with, my mom would say, the wrong crowd for a while. Desperately wanted to try smoking, but couldn't. I could never inhale, but I'd still go behind the sports hall with the girls at lunchtime, So, and I went to the local college to do 2 A levels, and didn't really know what to do. And because my lot didn't go to university or polytechnics as it would have been back then. And my mum kind of said to me, what about, well, the careers advice I got was, oh, Ruth will make a good secretary, one of the offices in town, which wasn't terribly aspirational, I guess. And then my mum suggested nursing. So I thought, okay, could do. So I applied to be a nurse at the North Devon Hospital, Plymouth, and Bristol. Really wanted to go to Bristol, but didn't get in. And then my mom said, well, why don't you try to get into one of the London teaching hospitals? And I was pretty nonplussed by it. She evidently wanted me to move further away from home than I was actually looking at. And so I went for an interview at St Mary's in Paddington and got accepted. And when we kind of reflect on your life and you think of a bit of a sliding doors moment, I think that was probably one of my first sliding doors moments. And the foresight of my mom to think, what, if you're going to do nursing, go to one of the London teaching hospitals, and go and experience a different life. And so that kind of got me out of North Devon. And I trained as a nurse, which was a bit of a shock to the system of a just 19-year-old, I guess, but an amazing life experience, really. But I was never the next Florence Nightingale. It wasn't my calling, if indeed that is such a thing, because I'm not sure whether I do think that. Maybe it is for some people. But I qualified, staff nursed for a while, and then what I found was, as a 21, 22-year-old, I was looking at women who would probably only been 35, 40, but that seems quite old when you're in your early 20s.
Yeah.
And, they were doing an amazing job. And we know that. I don't need to labour the point about the amazing job nurses do. But nobody seemed to be particularly happy or satisfied. And I felt that the issues that I saw with the institution that was the NHS, and still is the NHS, and they're very different issues probably now than they were then, I kind of just felt that being part of a large institution was not going to be for me, and that I wasn't going to be able to affect change. And so I left and tried various sales jobs, including drugs legally, cars.
Thanks for the disclaimer there. Just thinking.
Basic disclaimer. And they were bloody awful, really awful jobs. But it was, well, I say awful. It was awful in as much was it was a very different environment from being part of a team on a ward caring for people. But I learned a lot. And then I told you this was a long story. And then in 1989, I moved to Newcastle with my then boyfriend, and we set up a financial services business doing remortgages. So that was when I first got into financial services.
Yeah. And that leap seems quite a leap from, I mean, even in terms of the stereotypical characteristics of working in nursing to sales to financial planning.
Yeah.
Where did that leap come from? Your then partner's background or history experience? Was that sparking the idea, or was it something that was just on the rise as a profession?
Well, for me, it was totally left field. The guy I was going out with at the time, this was Thatcher's late 80s, like booming 80s. Again, which was good for some people and hideous for other people, a bit like the times we're living through at the moment. Interest rates were 13, 14, 15%. When at the moment we feel squeezed by interest rates of 4 or 5%. But people's levels of borrowing wasn't as high, but people were feeling the pain from very high interest rates. So Martin, the guy I was with, opened a remortgage brokerage, and I just thought, Newcastle seems quite a fun place to live. Let's go and live there. And this is really puts into context the lack of training that people had back in those days. Is that you went on a 1 week course and that was it. You were providing advice to people, and it was really the infancy of what has now grown into something that I think, in the main, is a very caring, holistic profession. It was the days where it was about selling products to earn commission. And I knew very little about money in those days. I'd never had a mortgage myself. Didn't know what a pension was really. I wasn't given advice in those days. I was kind of running the office, so I learned a lot about running a small business. But it was quite a change. But I guess it was just it felt like an evolution. It felt like I was trying to find what it was I wanted. And I do remember in my 20s, and I often think this when I talk to young people now, and they're worried because they're changing jobs quite a bit, or they don't quite know what they want to do. I think that's actually, it's not abnormal. I think it's actually quite healthy. I think try things, and you've got, nothing is forever. You can change something if it doesn't work out. So I think I was at that experimental phase. And I moved on from the small firm that we had to work for a large insurance company that set up a direct sales force. And that was when I guess I started to learn a little bit more about the industry and saw different aspects of the industry. And it was in that kind of Wild West days when you would you just have a list of names and phone people up and try and get an appointment and go and see them. So it was tough sales.
Is that an arena you were comfortable with? I mean, because if you look at today, for example, but today isn't always a reflection on where we've been, and I'm testament to that as well myself. That actually working in sales, I always found quite well, very brutal in a lot of ways, that kind of, especially in direct engagement kind of sales, that whereas now you're a speaker, you're an MC, you're a host, you're very forward facing, client facing, audience facing. At that point, how did you find yourself in that arena where that you were in that traditional kind of, and I remember those days well, you get given a bunch of compliment slips and get told to go out in a 10-mile radius and do it. I get that completely,
yeah. And I think it's making us both go, as we're saying that,
really
isn't it?
Yeah.
And that, it is really interesting, isn't it? What you will do, you're given a job, you don't really know. I didn't know very much at all at that point. And I'm very well behaved. If somebody tells me this is what you need to do, you need to make 10 calls a day to try and get 2 appointments, that's what I'll do. And I just did it. And I kind of, when I reflect back, I almost don't know where that kind of confidence came from. If indeed it was confidence, or whether it was just something that I felt I needed to do. This was the job. This is what you had to do. I suppose in a sales team, again, you may relate to this, Nick, you see the people who seem to be on fire, that seem to be, have no problem, are always bringing in big cases. And you just do it. Right? Now, I think what's interesting about that is it does teach us a form of resilience, doesn't it? It makes it one of the things that really sticks from that, not just from them, but from, as my time in financial services progressed, is to be successful. It's about the activity that you put in. You can't influence the outcome, but you can influence what you do. Now, I wouldn't have seen it as clearly as that in those days. I didn't know all of those mantras that we seem to see all over Instagram these days. But it was true. If I had a list and I phoned up enough people, there would be somebody that would say, oh yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah, come around at, you go around at 6 o'clock in the evening, they'd be cooking their sausage and chips for dinner, and you'd go in and the telly would be on and the dog would be trying to bite you, and you'd have to have a conversation about an endowment product or something, which is an old style of financial product that we don't actually really have these days. So it was tough. And I mean, these days, I don't think you would let a young woman in her mid-20s phone someone up broadly out of the blue and go round to their house in the evening and try and do business. It was different times.
It's such an interesting subject because I was thinking of you recently that obviously now being self-employed and a business owner, you have an element of choice about how you position yourself, you market yourself, you sell yourself, for want of a better word. But so now that thought of direct sales actually can, like you said, it creates that reaction. How did I do that? But it's a lack of choice at the time. And I think, as you said, with the increase of platforms to do business on, ways to do business, and maybe there's just more choice now. Whereas before, you had to do it. That was the way that you did it. So you just pushed on through.
Yeah.
And you can kind of understand now why maybe some people find themselves less resilient in client-facing situations.
Yeah. I mean, it's a conversation I've had with a number of times with colleagues over the years, and not always with people of my age, some just younger people that I work with who have come up through more of a sales background rather than, what's really interesting with the evolution of financial services is, as I was saying, many of my colleagues, all of my colleagues are very well qualified these days. And because there's a scarcity of decent financial advisors and financial planners, there's not a problem really for many firms with finding clients. And so a number of people arrive at a firm these days and they inherit a number of clients and they just carry on servicing them. And there is a real difference in, I think, mentality around clients that you've won, you've known, you've got to know them, you've pitched to, you've sold in an ethical way. And I don't I still feel I need to qualify that word, what it is that you can do from them, and they engage with you, and you build that relationship over time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredibly rewarding when you have done that. And it's a very different skill set. And I do sometimes think to expect people to have the ability to do that cold calling, going to networking dues, meeting people, opening up conversations, and then be very good technicians and very good on follow through with the service is a really big ask, isn't it, of people?
Yeah.
So what I'm starting to see in the financial world is people who are very much more playing to their strengths, and indeed the things that they enjoy. There are some people that love the thrill of the chase of a client, and would be very dissatisfied with just meeting the same people year in, year out, and doing the whole annual planning process. So I think what we're noticing is there's different roles within the profession for people than we probably thought there were years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've spoken over the past couple of years around the art of speaking and actually delivering messages, and in a lot of ways, actually, it's a better platform for you to position yourself with people, because you can show more vulnerability, I believe, when you're speaking. As you know, it's something that I'm very passionate about being able to share more of yourself to forge a deeper, faster, stronger connection with people. I think certainly with speaking with a capital S means that you do position yourself within the space, and certainly over the past few years, that's become more and more kind of on my radar, the work that you're doing out there as a speaker, the MC and the presenting. We have a real shared love and commonality of the things around like conditioning and narrative and perspective. Yeah. We've kicked around those ideas before. But for me, I think when it comes to speaking, again, there's a lot of fear around speaking. I seem to have the opposite challenge, that if I'm on stage in front of thousands of people, that I'm absolutely fine. I'm anxious for 2.5 minutes, then I'm fine, always. I know my playbook. But actually in networking environments and even in some social environments, I still am that person that sticks to the sides that I warm up. It's an interesting one.
Isn't that curious? Yeah.
It is. So what's your journey been with speaking? Because obviously I've since we've known each other, obviously you've been way into your journey of being able to stand up and deliver. Tell me about your experiences of speaking.
Yeah, we're just very happy to do that. One of the things that you said that I think is very interesting, and is probably the person that you see today, it is when you can find yourself and are able to be your full vulnerable self.
Yeah.
And I think for years, I channeled somebody somewhat differently because that was who I thought I needed to be. Now, I don't mean that like, I wasn't pretending to be anybody other than the Ruth Stuckey, generally, but the behaviors, the conversations, I think when you're younger as well or less experienced, you tend to mimic your mentors or people who have had influence.
Profile Me is a super shareable mobile application designed to help professionals grow their personal brand. Proudly paperless, this powerful tool packs the power of web, social media, and messaging into one beautifully designed interface that offers a unique and human-centric way to connect and build trust with clients. Easy to share on any platform and easy to save to any phone's home screen. With Profile Me, getting referred has never been easier.
But I did find, and I remember this was a big realization, and maybe it came with the freedom of setting up my own firm with my two co-founders, that I suddenly just thought, this is a reflection of me. Maybe it is therefore okay to be me. And so that was something that grew. But to answer your point on the speaking thing, yeah, I've been very lucky, I think, that people have given me opportunities to speak over the years from, I remember giving a presentation to a bunch of accountants years ago. It was the very first one I'd done. And And my boss was at the back of the room, kind of like doing this kind of like, smile, you know, because you're like totally frozen. And then people have asked me to speak. And I think one of the things that you mentioned when you said about going on stage in the first 2.5 minutes, you're nervous and then you're fine because you know your playbook. I think that's the thing, is when you are confident in what it is that you are and what you're able to deliver. And I think also trust in yourself. So for me, what I've felt comfortable speaking about is my experience of setting up my own business and how we ran that business and what I felt it needed to be like. And I guess that was my story. So nobody could say, oh, no, that's not right, Ruth. That's not what you did, because I bloody did it, you know.
That's the beauty of lived experience. You can't be wrong because it's your story.
And I think that was very helpful. And then I've been asked, so the first big speaking experience I had was at an event called Back to Why, and it was in front of about 250, 300 people. And I'd absolutely never spoken in front of that many people before. And I was about the second or third person going on. And one of the colleagues in my world had gone on and he was absolutely bloody brilliant. I was like, wow, how am I going to follow that? The second one was a little bit more so-so, and then it was me. And what really helped me, Nick, was that's how I planned my talk, knew what I was going to say, sorted out my slides. But a couple of nights before, I'd been out to dinner with a couple of friends. And one of my friends, who's not a very good cook, was telling her story of following a recipe. It still makes me laugh. And this recipe said, like, add a pint of water, add a stock cube or whatever it was, and then reduce by a third. And she didn't know what reduce by a third meant. So she went to the sink and poured out half and then put it back on the pan and on the stove. And of course, what it means is you boil the hell out of it until it halves. Yeah. And it just got me thinking about the crazy language that we all use when we're familiar, you know. So, you know, a recipe saying reduce by half, why would you know what that means? Yeah. And so my friend kind of bet me that I couldn't get that story into my speech. Unfortunately, the guy that had gone before me was talking about jargon. So I just got up, and before I knew it, these words were coming out of my mouth that I was telling that story. And it was just like, oh, bloody hell, where did that come from? And it was just really weird. So I think what I learned was, know what you're going to say, but also don't be afraid to inject some personality or go off piste, or actually just go with the flow a little bit. And I think I got a little bit of a laugh from it, and then off I went, you know. So it was quite an interesting, and I also thought to myself, why the bloody hell did you do that? That was a bit risky.
But that's the exciting bit as well. There's chaos, there's the excitement in the chaos, right?
Yeah.
But I think you're right. You mentioned kind of, you look at things like business networking, you look at things like business and who we kind of look up to or aspire to be, or is kind of the last bastion of mask wearing in a lot of ways, or at least the heaviest bastion of mask wearing, that we walk into these environments like pretending that we're strong, successful, happy and confident all the time, eat some breakfast, sell some stuff and go again, kind of thing. Yeah. That's kind of the format, right? But we know we're wearing a mask when you leave and everything just drops.
Yeah.
What I love about your story there was actually that what you were doing is you were prepared to lose in that way by telling this story because it felt right. And it feels then people know when they're being fed a script. We've all had those kind of calls, haven't we? Those kind of direct sales calls. Or so by you going on to show your humanity, I guarantee they would have begged you to kind of be successful then, because you showed them what you had. I love that.
Yeah, it's funny.
We alluded to kind of the current economic climate, should we say, the financial crisis. I'm trying not to put too heavy in terms, and I'm not sure how much it needs kind of amplifying, but these uncertain times when it comes to kind of finances and stuff. Now, we know there's roots in lots of different things that are going on. It's been a turbulent old time for the world over the past few years with, here in the UK, a change of monarchy. You have 15 different prime ministers over the past year. global conflict and everything else. But of course, rooted in that was also COVID and lockdown. Now, I know for you, lockdown and like myself, that shielded element played a big part in our lives at the time. How did that play out with you, both from yourself, but also a professional level as well?
The COVID
with
thing.
Lockdown and everything else. I know when we were talking about one of the conferences we're both speaking at, you were kind of beaming in to do it, weren't you? Because it was just on the tail of opening up again from lockdown.
Yeah, I count myself as extremely fortunate during lockdown, Nick. That so I live in London, but my partner has a place in Dorset, and London became such an eerie place just before the official lockdown started that it was very obvious that those that could were getting out of town if they were lucky to do that, or that people were just not, because a lot of people commute into London, obviously, don't they? So they weren't wanting to commute into London. And I think we anticipated one of our previous prime ministers announcing lockdown. And so we went down to Dorset, and I was extremely lucky to be in a nice house in the countryside with my partner and a friend. And those being three of us together meant that we were able to keep each other fit, well, happy, focused, pick each other up, exercise, eat healthily, and become masters of Zoom and Teams like everybody else did.
Yeah.
So I had a really fortunate lockdown, if you can put it thus. I was lucky that none of my family or friends, other than suffering some loneliness, were pretty resilient. From a work perspective, we were able to click into an online version of our business really very, very quickly. And the firm that I'm now a non-exec for, Paradigm Norton, are a very caring and pastoral type of firm. So we were all over making sure that our team were all well and coping. But it was nonetheless, I've thought about this quite a lot, even for somebody who, by my own definition, had a good lockdown, there was this underlying pressure and concern, wasn't that? We didn't know where this was going, didn't know where it was going to end up. We didn't know who was going to get affected next. And I think it was something that we all lived with, that I think we're still coming to terms with. So it's, for me, as I say, I count myself as incredibly fortunate. But I do know people who have really, really suffered, who've lost people, who are suffering terribly from long COVID. And I think we're still seeing the back end of that, aren't we? And I think there's a number of kids, teenagers in particular, I think, that are still really suffering with this.
Absolutely, really seeing this in children and young adults, sadly. Those really close to me as well. And I think it's a real difficult one. From a professional point of view, I think one of the interesting things, though, it did speed up the switch over to technology and different ways of doing things, which actually do work in our favor now, as much as we all love face-to-face, that at least now we have a valid option in the times we don't have to travel somewhere with documents, for example.
I think it's I'm kind of observing what firms are doing within the financial services space, and the firm for which I'm a non-exec in particular. And my observation were the introverts struggle to be working from home, but now they're at home, they're the ones that are finding it harder to want to come back into the office. And I've heard lots of commentary around, but I'm more efficient from home, or I get more done. I'm saving time on my commute, and all of those things are really valid. But for me, it does miss the point, because certainly with a business like Paradigm Norton, I think there's so much more to work than efficiency.
Yeah.
For me, it's, and I always remember this when we set up our own business. I wanted to create a culture and a place where people wanted to be, where they felt seen and heard and listened to.
Yeah.
And we could all see and hear and listen to other people. And my concern, and thinking about the mental health issues that have come out of COVID, the more we don't incorporate a return to a community, whatever that might be, the greater concerns I have about people's mental health and society at large. And so I suppose what I'm saying is I think a return to the office, at least 3 days a week, I personally think is a good thing. And I know not everybody would agree with that, but as I say, I think it's just down to being human-centric. So it's recognizing people benefit from flexibility, benefit from not having to travel. I do absolutely understand all of those things, but I do think we miss the point if we think it's totally transformed the workplace.
And you touched on one of those things already, one of the two big C's, that's the community element. I mean, it's community and commonality. Those are the two things that really kind of went missing, didn't they, when we weren't all coming together for a combined purpose in a space.
Yeah.
Recently, a lot of my events have been maybe the first time that people have been together in many years. So they're getting together like a staff day or an away day or something.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that even people that really didn't want to come into the office or back into that, it was just so nice to see that kind of very human reaction. Lots of hugs going on everywhere. It's a really nice thing. But on the flip side of things, like you say, I also understand that some of the environments I work in, I know that home isn't always a safe place for people. So work can be a refuge. And the reverse obviously remains the same depending on your culture. And I guess not everyone's lucky to have you as a boss, are they? So.
But you do make a good point about where people are working from, because, and I know a friend of mine who works in the charity sector, and he's been really disappointed with, let's just call it middle management, middle or senior management, who are able to work very comfortably from home in their office or study or spare room or whatever it might happen to be, and forgetting that, and I believe this very passionately, that if you are afforded that level of office, in inverted commas, it is your role to guide and mentor and look out for people and actually be available, much more available. And there's people who are working in very cramped conditions, working in shared spaces, sitting on their edge of the bed, trying to do a job. Yeah, that's just really, really hard, isn't it? Really hard.
It's crazy. So fast forward to today, we've kind of addressed right at the beginning where you are, who you are right now. What's next for Ruth Stuckey?
I wish I knew, Nick.
I wish I knew as well. I'm constantly winging this every year. I keep saying the same thing. I don't know where I'm going with this, but
it's a really good point, because as I've said, I've kind of stepped out of what I would call a proper day job, and I'm involved in a number of things that I love and I find intellectually incredibly stimulating. I get to meet some great people. I chew the fat about where I think the world is going. What I said to myself at the start of this year, and again, I know how lucky this is to be able to say it, I want to take 3 to 6 months and not really say yes to anything, to just give myself some time to think and be, and really work out what it is that I do want to do in this next chapter. And I'm having reasonable success at that, but I don't know whether it is FOMO or whether I just like to say yes, or it genuinely is, God, that's really interesting. Yes, I would like to do that. Thanks for asking. So I'm thinking that I'm going to be continuing to stay in the kind of more financial well-being coaching space, whether that is talking with clients, people who need coaching as people who've got money issues, whether that's actually help financial planners and financial coaches do their job differently. I'm not quite sure yet, because there is always this thing, and I don't know whether this is part of the human condition, Nick, that I kind of sometimes think I only know what I know, don't I? What if there's this thing just out there I haven't given myself time to notice?
That's an interesting one. So that came up in a conversation I had recently with somebody about, and again, like you were saying, you kind of get into this was with a student, and I think if you've got parents that are doctors, it's very hard to think of anything else other than being a doctor, for example.
Yeah.
And there is that element of saying all the most exciting things that I do have come from not knowing what's going to happen. This isn't a job that I ever aspired to do, kind of thing. I think you're absolutely right. I think when it comes to this kind of stuff, we don't know, but it's a not knowing. I think sometimes it creates the opportunities. I think what you do though is you surround yourself with people that create opportunities that you choose to be part of. And like you said, it's really hard to turn down because actually culturally it lies into you. But when I was working in sales, especially on a senior level, if I ever wanted to look around at other jobs, all I would look at was other senior sales jobs. I've got tunnel visioned into not looking at any other valid options. And so I absolutely get that completely. We get hooked on what we do. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it genuinely, if we have this conversation in 12 months' time, I'm still doing the same thing, Nick. Could well be the answer. But
I do. I'm winging it, so we're all good. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So we'll see.
The question, I just looked at the time. I cannot believe how quickly this has flown by. I love talking to you. I always do, whether it's been recorded or not. So the question I do want to ask you, and this is a really big question for a short answer, is what does financial well-being mean to you? If you were to sum it up to somebody that didn't understand the term, and I appreciate it's subjective, but to you, given your experience and your seniority in the industry, what do you think financial well-being means to people?
I think I think if we take a step back from the word financial well-being, what is well-being? And there are many definitions of what well-being is. Yeah. But the most simple one that I've seen is that we all have part of our life tends to be a career or a purpose of some sort. We have our physical well-being. We have the quality of our social relationships, whether that's family or friends. We are part of a community, or are we part of a community, I guess is the question. And then we have finance. So I haven't explained that very well. So for me, well-being is made up of 5 facets: purpose/career, physical well-being, the quality of your social relationships, the communities you're part of, and then financial well-being kind of underpins those things. You could have as much money as you want, but absent those other 4 things, or that if they're out of kilter, it doesn't mean so much. So I spoke at a conference in November, and I genuinely think the path, the direction of travel for financial services, financial planning, is that we in time will become well-being businesses that happen to talk to people about money.
Yeah.
Because
which
otherwise,
I think
what's the point?
Again, it comes back to the beginning, that human-centric approach to things. I like that. That's really cool. Thank you. So you've done this before because you attended my Find Your Voice event. So you have chosen before, but for the sake of everybody else, I am now the MC of the O2 Arena in London. 20,000 people paid their hard-earned money to come and hear you talk. You sat back in the green room, you're sipping on a Prosecco, and you hear me call your name, and your walk-on music kicks in. That song that motivates you, that lifts you, that gets you at peak state to perform. Ruth Stuckey, what would your walk-on music be, and why?
It would be A Little Respect by Erasure.
Great tune. I haven't heard that in ages. That's great to add to the playlist.
What I love about that is if there's a very particular opening ding 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 ding, and I've tried to discover. You probably didn't want me to sing it, but
no, absolutely no.
It lifts my mood.
Yeah,
every time. And why? It was accidentally the first song at my wedding, but I'd loved the song before that, and so when I got married, I'm no longer married. We wanted to have "Stand By Your Man" as the opening song, and the DJ cocked up, and so Johnny, my husband, knew I loved that song, so he just said, "Get A Little Respect on," and so that was our opening dance as well. But I just think it's such an uplifting song.
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
If you listen to the words very closely, then maybe they're not quite as uplifting, but the tune's very.
Well, the tune does it, absolutely.
The tune does it, yeah.
Ruth Stuckey, big round of applause.
Oh, thank you, Nick. It's lovely talking to you.
What an amazing guest. Thank you so much for giving up your time. I hope
Pleasure.
everybody else enjoyed that as much as I did. Really sad to bring it to an end. Genuinely, I'm gutted, but I need to bring it to an end. So
of course you do.
Please stay tuned for episode 4 coming your way next Monday. So hit like, subscribe, and all whatever it. I'm not a details guy. Whatever it takes to get you back here next Monday. We have the amazing Rich Jones, and we'll be talking all things around the prison service and the military. So really fascinating episode. Another really kind of diverse, eclectic mix in season 6. So I look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, stay well, be happy, take care. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye. Bye.